blue.
Yes, Johnny?
They tell me that true love is blind, but right now to me, I'm Daddy Rolling Stone. Daddy Rolling Stone.
Radio TV Phono Nut here, and the selections you just heard are being played on a GayTone 78 RPM record player from about 1947. Yeah, I wonder if the makers of the current Crosley and Victrola brands of modern day record players will revive this name. Probably not, because in 2020 this might be considered a politically incorrect brand name. I don't know. But anyway, I was looking around on the computer for something else here, and I found the files where I made a repair video on this particular record player over a year ago. But for whatever reason, I never edited those files together and uploaded them to YouTube. So that's what you're going to see today, the repair of this GayTone record player. And it's really nothing special on the inside, just a little 3-tube amplifier, and one side of the AC line is directly connected to the chassis, like so many were back then. And what we did was first we installed a polarized power cord, and then we rewired the switch to have the hot side of the line, narrow blade, connected to the switch, and then had the neutral side of the line, wide blade, connected directly to the chassis. And I also connected an isolation capacitor, I believe a .015 microfarad AC safety capacitor between chassis ground and the tone arm and cartridge here, which originally they had this connected directly to the chassis. So if you grab this tone arm while another part of your body was in contact with something with a return path to ground, and depending on how you had the plug oriented in the wall socket, you could have got a very nasty surprise, maybe even one that would have taken you out of here. So to help minimize any danger, we made a few little modifications. Now, of course, if you plug this into an outlet that's wired wrong, as in the hot and neutral reversed, then all bets are off. But other than that, all this really needed was the usual capacitors and resistors, and I replaced the old heavy cartridge with a fan steel P51-3, and I played with the counterbalance spring to get the tracking pressure down. Cleaned and lubricated the drive mechanism, which is standard procedure. It could stand a new idler wheel. You can hear it's got a little idler wheel noise, but it's not too terribly bad. Alright, anyway, I'll stop bumping my gums now, and we'll get on to the video, and I'll go ahead and apologize in advance. I let a dirty word slip during the video, and of course I try not to do that normally, but occasionally something slips out. But I apologize for that, and we'll get on with the video. And as far as the tone arm rest, this originally had a clip, a flange on the bottom of the original cartridge that was designed to, you'd slide the tone arm into place and the flange would lock under this rest here. Well, of course, that's no longer there, so I just used a piece of hookup wire made into a tone arm tie down, and that'll keep the arm from moving around during transit and damaging the cartridge or the needle. Now, eventually this may be up for grabs. I've really got to go through my stash and do some downsizing and decide what I want to get rid of and what I want to keep. So, and I can't keep everything, so we may be getting rid of this down the road, and if it comes to that, I'll let you know. Alright, enough talk, and let's get on with the video. Here's a sticker that I've never noticed before. I don't think I have. A radio service called Ray's Radio Shop. And I really can't make out the rest of this. Maybe I can once I upload the video to the computer and look at it on the computer monitor, but I always like finding those extra little tidbits in these old record players and radios that I come across. This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here we have a GayTone. Get a good look at that right there. 78 RPM record player from about 1947. Now, this thing came to me already partially disassembled. I can tell that somebody has replaced the power cord, and the motor is all not in securely, unscrewed, which that shouldn't be a problem to fix, and the motor board is not screwed down, but all the screws are in a Ziploc bag inside the unit. So this was obviously one that somebody, I figure they replaced the power cord. It didn't work, so they just sort of slapped it back together and figured they'd get to it another day. Well, they obviously didn't get around to it. Now I need to address a comment that's recently been made. Some people have said I needed to work on my editing skills, that some of my clips are being cut off in mid-sentence. Yeah, that's been happening about ever since about as long as I've had this camera. And it's not me, it's the camera. If I turn the camera off too quick after saying the final word in a clip, the camera is what's cutting the final word or two off. It's not me. So I'm going to try to let the camera run a few seconds whenever I get ready to end a clip, and then maybe my words won't get cut off. Here's the amplifier. It's a nice 3-tube amp, which should give a pretty nice tone and good volume level, but this is what's known as a death trap. Hot chassis, no isolation capacitor between B- and chassis, just one side of the line going to the chassis, but it looks like the power cord is in the hot side of the switch, so that's good. I'll probably just put a polarized cord on here, and assuming this is plugged into an outlet that's wired correctly, it shouldn't be a problem. However, I'm going to have to check the tone arm, because believe it or not, some of these use a cartridge with a grounded case, meaning the negative terminal of the cartridge has a strap running from the terminal to the cartridge case, and when the cartridge is mounted to a metal tone arm and you have a hot chassis, then you also have a hot tone arm. I have a record player in the shop right now with such a wiring scheme, and I'll have to check and make sure this one is not that way. If it is, we'll have to do something, maybe put a isolation capacitor between the cartridge ground and the chassis. It won't keep you from getting shocked, but the reactance of the capacitor will keep the current level to a point where it shouldn't be lethal. Uncomfortable? Yeah. Lethal? Probably not. Alright, let's get this thing in the shop and see if we can get it to sing again. Okay, just to see what's going on here, see if this is a true death trap. Have our meter set to continuity, have one end of the meter clipped to the tone arm. I'll touch the other meter probe to the chassis, and let's listen for the continuity buzzer. Oh yes. So yes, this is definitely a death trap. Now, if this power cord were plugged into the AC outlet where the hot side of the line was going to the chassis, and if someone touched this tone arm while part of their body was in contact with something with a return path to ground, it could be deadly. At the very least, it would make you say a few choice words, but we know how people often like to take their record player outside to listen to it. Let's say they were outside barefoot and grab this tone arm, it wouldn't be pleasant. So we're going to have to make this safer. I'm really surprised that a whole bunch of people didn't get killed by these things. So we'll definitely have to make it safer. Now I will say that the larger manufacturers like RCA, Zenith, Philco, Motorola, etc., they usually took steps to make their products safer, as in at least an isolation capacitor between the chassis and circuit ground, but a lot of what I call these back alley manufacturers. They made them as cheaply as possible. You're not going to find a UL mark on them, and they didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to safety. Just get something that'll play and get it out the door. And speaking of which, eBay's got on my bad side again. Had that VM school record player listed for about the 4th time. I decided I'd try a different approach and say in the listing title, not a Crosley, and in the listing description I made mention of it, the VM being a nice quality American-made record player, unlike the modern Chinese Crosley garbage. Well, got up this morning to find that eBay had pulled my listing because of brand misuse. Apparently they didn't like me bad-mouthing their beloved Crosley name. I guess since there's so many of these importers selling hundreds, if not thousands, of Crosley and similar style pieces of garbage on eBay, and that's what's making eBay all the big bucks, then heaven forbid somebody say a bad word against Crosley that might convince somebody not to buy one and cut eBay out of some money. As far as I'm concerned, brand misuse of the Crosley name would be encouraging someone to buy one of their shitty products. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox about that. Now let's get the record player on the bench and see what happens. Okay, I'll show you what I mean as far as this arm being hot. Have our meter set to measure AC volts. Have one side of the meter clipped to the tone arm. I'll use our meter probe to touch to the earth ground here on the outlet. So turn it on and watch the meter. As you can see, we have 120 volts on that tone arm. Now let's reverse the power plug in the wall outlet and retest. That's better. Nothing there. Now it's safe for me to touch the tone arm now. Right now, with my bare skin touching the pavement, if I flip this plug back around to where there's 120 volts on the arm and I grab the hold of the arm, this might be my, the last video of the trashy record player would be the last video, because this one would never make it. I'm getting no hum or no crackle or no nothing out of the volume control, so that makes me wonder if the amp is even working. Okay, now I hear a little hum from the speaker, so that's good. And of course the cartridge appears to be dead. No surprise there. Darn thing won't fall. That's worse. Well, it's just going to have to be that way. But you can see the strap that's running from the cartridge body to the negative terminal. That's how the tone arm is hot. And the reason for that is to keep hum and static and other extraneous noises to a minimum. But it also creates a safety hazard. Yeah, I can tell the amp is working. It obviously needs capacitors, but it is at least passing a signal. Okay, here we are with the tone arm with a Fansteel P51-2 cartridge installed. That's actually a compromise needle that was really designed to play both LPs and 78s, but it's really not good for LPs. It's better for 78s, and it will allow playing of standard 78s and the little kitty 78s with narrower grooves than what a normal 78 would have. These cartridges always seem to work okay, but the build quality leaves a lot to be desired. In fact, on almost every one of them I get, I end up having to glue the pins in place because they're just too wobbly. And I've even had some where the plastic cartridge body would come apart and I'd have to glue it back together. But what do? If you're going to fix these things, you have to make the best out of what's available today. And a lot of these current cartridges, even though they usually work, the quality just isn't there. But they don't mind charging a premium price for them, though. I did not measure the tracking pressure with the original heavy-duty metal crystal cartridge in here, but I feel like it was in the 40 to 50 gram range, because even with this lighter weight cartridge we were tracking at 30 grams, which is much too high for this cartridge. So, had to stretch and manipulate the counterbalance spring to get it down to about 14 grams. That would still be too high if we were playing 78, LPs or 45s, but with 78s, that's not a big deal considering that originally they were played on equipment that tracked generally at least at 30 grams, and it wasn't unheard of for tracking pressures as high as 80 to 90 grams, and on some acoustic phonographs it was well into the hundreds of grams, over 100 grams. So yeah, I don't think 14 will phase a 78 too bad. Now I'm probably going to have to add a little bit to these tone arm wires, because I had to move them up here further to where they'd reach the cartridge connector pins, but that won't be a big deal. Alright, let's go put it back in the record player and see if this thing will sing for us. And since the old cartridge had a little flange on it to slide into this clip right here, which is something the new cartridge doesn't have, I had to crudely rig up something to hold the tone arm in place during transit, because we don't want the tone arm flopping around. So for now I just have an old power cord attached under this old armrest. Maybe later I'll get some kind of Velcro strap and put on there. That'll look better, but for now this will work. Okay, here we are all fixed up. A couple of additions I made. This is our tone arm ground isolation cap connected between the negative side of the cartridge and the chassis, which is circuit ground. Now with this plastic bodied cartridge, I do not have the tone arm in any way connected to anything. So there's no chance of you grabbing the tone arm and getting shocked. However, if somebody started feeling around under the tone arm and touched the negative cartridge lead, I wanted it to have a little protection. So here's our protection, this isolation cap. You'll still get popped if conditions are favorable, but the current shouldn't be enough to be lethal. Another thing I had to do is, whenever I was testing this last night, I was getting a lot of squealing and other strange noises, especially when the tone control was moved towards the treble position. And I've had this problem a few other times on record players. It sounds sort of like RF interference. So what I did was installed a .001 microfarad cap from the plate of the first audio tube to ground, and that took care of it. So apparently there's some RF interference getting in somewhere and wreaking havoc with the audio stages, but this cap dumps the interference to ground, but the value is small enough where it doesn't adversely affect the audio quality any. Another thing I could have done to make this thing safer, and I may still do it, especially if I decide to let this thing go, is install a small isolation transformer inside here somewhere. That would be the safest and easiest way to do things, and like I said, I might do that if I ever decide to let this go, but right now I'm really not in the mood to let stuff go. Just seems like things are kind of slow right now, so might as well just hang on to the stuff. I think you can pick up a suitable isolation transformer for around 15-20 bucks. You know, you don't have to get a super heavy duty one. I think I saw some smaller ones in the range of 15, 25, and 50 watts. and I would think 50 watts would be suitable for this amplifier. Of course, we won't be running the motor off of the isolation transformer. It'll be wired to the primary side. Only the amp will be connected to the secondary side of the transformer. And you can see where I bolted the motor in place. They just had it screwed into the motor board with some wood screws, and those had long since worked loose, and only one of them was still there. So to make it more secure, I just bolted the thing in place, and there's no way it's going to fall out now. Well, now we're at 11.4 grams. That's better. I guess the reason I was getting the higher reading before is I did not have the tone arm bolted down at the back. I just stuck it in the hole, and I guess bolting it down placed the tone arm in a secure position where it couldn't move, so that took a few grams off of it, but that's good. That's an optimum tracking pressure right there.
Yeah, we were together, such a perfect pair. Didn't mind the weather.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
It was plain to see you were meant for me. You came to me.
Alright, here's an example of the record player being plugged into a miswired outlet. And you can see we have 120 volts there. So that's a dangerous situation, but if I plug this into an outlet that's wired correctly, there won't be any voltage there. And this could also stand a new idler wheel because of what you can hear there. But even if I put a rebuilt wheel on it, we'd still have to turn this thing on every so often on a regular basis, to be exact, because there's no kind of wheel retraction mechanism in these older single-speed models. So if it sits too long, the new wheel is just going to develop a dent too. So, you know, really don't have to get in any hurry about that, and with a record playing, you really can't notice it that much anyway, so there you go. And here we are with a properly wired AC outlet, and as you can see, no potential there, and that's what we want. So you always want to make sure your outlets are wired properly, and they make little testers for that. If you are not really electrically or electronically inclined, they make a little plug-in tester with some LEDs on it that will tell you in a second if your outlet's wired wrong.
I'm telling you now, they call me love and dance. I'll rock 'em, roll 'em all night long. You went away, left me alone,
Okay. Yeah, occasionally 78s will get stuck.